Hello, and welcome to this professional development session titled Emerging Issues Climate Change. My name is Sierra Sumner, and I'm looking forward to diving into this topic together. Before starting the presentation, I'd like to share a bit about myself so you know where I'm coming from. I am passionate about disability and organized sport, particularly Special Olympics. This passion guides both my research and my career goals. I also enjoy spending time outdoors with my family and friends and hiking in my local conservation area during my free time. In terms of experience, I was a competitive swimmer for 8 years. This sport taught me the importance of motivation, perseverance, and dedication. During my undergraduate degree, I began volunteering with the Greater Durham Special Olympics. Soon after, I became the team manager and head coach of the Active Start and Fundamentals programs designed for children ages 2 to 12 with intellectual disabilities. Being a retired athlete myself and working with athletes on a weekly basis continues to shape my research and my passion for creating more equitable and engaging sport experiences for all children and youth. Academically, I attended Trent University for my Bachelor of Arts honors degree in Child and Youth Studies. My desire to keep learning led me to pursue my Bachelor of Education degree, also at Trent University. During this time, I felt that I really was called back to academia to be back in the research world, so I decided to pursue a Master of Arts in Early Childhood Studies at Toronto Metropolitan University. And now I am pursuing a PhD in Child and Youth Studies at Brock University. So I'm really excited today to be sharing one of my more recent presentations with you in the hope of raising awareness about climate change and how it affects children's social, physical, and emotional well-being. So today's session will be guided by two articles to frame the discussion. We'll begin with an introduction about why this topic matters, and then move into specific vulnerabilities that make children uniquely at risk. We'll explore major climate-related impacts like food insecurity, heat, flooding, and equity, before turning to specific theoretical frameworks that might guide how we look at these issues. I'll also be including some reflection prompts for you to pause and consider your role as a clinician or an educator as we progress through the presentation. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some key takeaways and a call to action to leave you with. Okay, so before we move any further, I'm just going to minimize my video here so I don't block any of the graphics in my presentation. The two articles that will be guiding our discussion today, the first one on the left, Climate Change and State of the Science for Children's Health and Environmental Health Equity, written by Fuller et al. In 2022. And the one on the right, titled Climate Change and Health of Our Children, Our Borrowed Future. This was written by Leffers, also in 2022. So, Leffers 2022 reviews the health impacts of climate change on children's health. They offer recommendations to pediatric healthcare professionals and personal interventions to address climate change. This article is framed by the 2020 Global Report of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. So, this Lancet Countdown is an annual publication that tracks the relationship between climate change and global health. And the 2020 report specifically stated that climate change is not only an environmental issue, but a health emergency. So keep that in mind as we move forward here. But in terms of the Fuller article on the right, they conducted a state of the science literature review regarding the adverse impacts of climate change. Their article found that poor communities of color are disproportionately impacted by climate change. Advocacy efforts and healthcare professionals need to use multifaceted approaches to address the impacts of climate change. So both articles really took a science approach and explained why children are at a higher risk of experiencing the effects of climate change from a scientific perspective. So let's get into why this might be. So, biologically, children are more vulnerable to climate change. We're going to go through these four examples together, but just keep in mind that each example is in comparison to adults. So, first off, children have an increased minute ventilation rate. Relative to adults, children have this increased minute ventilation rate, so there is more volume of air entering their lungs, therefore increasing inhalation of airborne pollutants. Children also have a higher consumption of food and water per body weight. They consume 2.5 times more water and 3 to 4 times more food per body weight than adults, which exposes them to greater absorption of harmful pollutants that are in our food and water sources. Children also have a large body surface area compared to mass, and their behavioral characteristics are very different than adults. So, children might often play on the floor where dust and potential cleaning chemicals are. And because they engage in that hand to mouth behaviors, putting their hands in their mouth after playing on the floor, they're at risk of ingesting these substances. In addition to the biological vulnerability, there are also some social and economic determinants as to why children are at greater risk of experiencing negative effects of climate change. So, where children are born, where they live, where they play, and where they go to school contributes to their access to healthy foods, health care, quality education, active transportation, safe housing, and safe neighborhoods. And all of these things are connected to climate change. For example, children who live or attend school in areas burdened by air pollution are more likely to have asthma and respiratory illness that can be made worse by climate change. As a researcher who works with children, I think it's very important to listen to the voices of children to really understand their experiences and their perspectives. So I wanted to include this video from BBC Ideas. It reviews what children want us to know about climate change from their perspective. So let's watch this, and then there is a question afterwards for you to think about.
If climate change were like an animal or a plant, I think it'd be some sort of parasite because it's the only thing that's actually growing and getting bigger while everything else starts dying off.
The environment is definitely very special because if we get rid of it, there's nowhere else we can go. Like, it's a very one in a million sort of planet.
A 10-year-old some years ago got cross with me and said, "You don't get it." He said, "You grew up thinking that polar bears would be there forever." He said, "I've grown up knowing they will go extinct."
I don't remember when I first became aware about climate change. I don't remember a time where I didn't know what it was. It feels like it's always been there.
Children are growing up with this knowledge and this awareness, whereas anyone over the age of, let's say, 30 is having to wake up to this, realize it. When we asked young people about how climate change made me feel, 3/4 or more think the future is frightening. So we know that it's having an emotional impact on children and young people all around the world.
I think climate change is like really scary, and the fact that lots of people aren't doing much about it just sort of freaks me out.
8 out of 10 told us that people had failed to take care of the planet. So this is young people and children looking to adults, looking to older people, looking to people in power and saying, "Why haven't you done something about this?"
It makes me feel angry to see such a clear issue and to see everyone knowing about this issue and still not doing anything that they really should be. It's frustrating, and I think it's also tiring to feel so sort of scared and angry.
One of the worst things we can do to children and young people is say, "Well, it's your responsibility now." I've heard this said to children. "Your generation will fix this. Your generation is so inspiring and creative and innovative. We're going to leave this to you to fix."
There's an idea by older people that it is sort of on young people to fix it, but I think that's really unfair, and I think it's a collective responsibility, not just on young people and not just on me.
one of the most worrying statistics was that 48% told us they were dismissed or ignored when they tried to talk about climate change. That we could do something about this afternoon. That we could do something about today.
In places like school, I feel like they don't really listen and don't really respect the fact that I've thought about it and tried to educate myself about it. I kind of feel really angry and frustrated because I am actually saying something meaningful. And if you're not prepared to listen to your children, it's going to have a big effect because we actually do have something to say and we are actually trying to make a change.
My advice to adults, parents, teachers is do not put it off, don't push it away, don't save it up and just have that big conversation. Talk about it regularly. That's crucial. And it's okay for you to say to your children, I don't have all the answers. We're not sure exactly how to deal with all of this, but let's find out together.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that, be sure to check out these videos next. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and click the bell to get a notification each time we upload a new video.
Okay, so with that video in mind, I think it's very important to recognize that children need to be heard and they need to participate in issues that are affecting them. So it's naive to think that children are oblivious to these issues. From these interviews, we can see that children are very aware of climate change and how it's affecting their lives. So including them in the discussion might help ease some of these anxieties about climate change. But as we move forward and as you think about your own practice, I would like to pose this question. How might the perspectives of young people influence our approach to discussing health and climate change? The articles talked about many different health issues that are a result of or are worsened by climate change. Some of these things included infectious disease, air quality, sea level rise, extreme weather events, and wildfires. So I knew it would be too much to address all of these issues. So I did some additional Canadian research to determine what climate change issues are most prevalent here. And the results gave me food supply, heat waves, and flooding were common Canadian climate change issues. So we're going to discuss those three further. So food supply was the first one. Poor quality nutrition and its adverse consequences are a key indicator of child health and development. And climate change is the #1 global driver of undernutrition. This is the global syndemic of climate change. So as we progress from the left to the right, we can see this really cause and effect happening. So we start on the far left with greenhouse gas emissions. So greenhouse gases are in the Earth's atmosphere that trap heat, contributing to the greenhouse effect, which then warms the planet. Then if we move a little bit farther to the right, we see that these greenhouse gas emissions cause rising sea levels, warmer ocean temperatures, and floods, as well as wildfires, droughts, and storms. Then if we move again to the right, we can see that these pieces, rising sea levels, floods, these warmer ocean temperatures, alter the fish catch, they alter the nutrient content in the fish. And then things like wildfires, droughts, and storms result in reduced crop yields, reduced nutrient content, and an increase in prices. So this leads to food insecurity, undernutrition, and obesity. And I underlined undernutrition here because malnutrition used to be seen as the greatest concern when addressing child nutritional health, but undernutrition is now the key concern for the nutritional health of children, both in the United States and globally. When nutritious foods are not easily accessible, children and families often turn to highly processed food options, leading to obesity and undernutrition rather than malnutrition. So let's move forward to talk about heat waves. During the past 50 years, our global climate has warmed, causing warmer ocean temperatures, more acidic oceans, glacial melt, with sea level rise. These changes are really threatening our human health. But how does this affect children specifically? Well, children are more vulnerable to elevations in temperature because of their reduced ability to regulate their internal temperature. They're also more likely to be spending time outdoors, making them more likely to suffer the effects of elevated temperatures in humid climates. This might include asthma, high blood pressure, and fainting due to high temperatures. Children must also rely on others to keep them safe during heat waves, so a lack of air conditioning can lead to dehydration, heat stroke, and electrolyte imbalance. And finally, children involved in vigorous athletic activities or adolescents who work in agriculture or landscaping are particularly at risk for adverse heat impacts because they are working outside and exposed to these high temperatures. The third and final climate change impact that I want to discuss is flooding. Floods occur during severe precipitation events, hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones, as well as from coastal flooding because of rising sea levels. And how does this affect children? So, in terms of flooding and children, the risk of drowning and potential for escape injuries is prevalent for anyone, but particularly for children. Flooding leads to a disruption of one's living situation, which can pose safety hazards. So, post-flood event, children are at a higher risk for exposure to mold and fungi growth in their damaged homes, which affects allergies or asthma symptoms. Also, the loss of home and possessions, economic hardship, and stress can really lead to difficult mental health challenges for children as well. Children who are living in poverty or low income are more at risk to factors that compound their ability to escape or reside in adequate housing after flooding events. This often leads to living in overcrowded housing that might make it challenging to escape a flood, and no money makes it hard to find somewhere else to live. So, a difficult situation all around. Young children who depend on ventilators, oxygen, or other electrically powered medical equipment are more vulnerable to power outages and the inability to escape flooding. I also wanted to touch on some equity and environmental issues and the connection between these two pieces. So, I wanted to start with redlining. Redlining is when banks identified neighborhoods with a high concentration of Black or immigrant populations as high risk and refused to give access to mortgages and other loans. This was officially outlawed in the 1960s, but its connection to children's health and climate change continue to impact children today. I want to more critically dive in to equity and the process of redlining. So I designed this graphic for you to visually see how these neighborhoods were impacted by climate change and the redlining process. The houses were not actually red themselves, but I wanted to emphasize that red lines were drawn on maps to mark areas where banks and insurance companies would not provide services. So redline neighborhoods typically experienced higher temperatures due to fewer trees in the neighborhood. There was also an impact on academic achievement because increased temperatures have a detrimental impact on academic achievement, which disproportionately affects Black and Latino students whose schools do not have air conditioning. Also, their proximity to industrial areas. Children living in these industrial areas have increased exposure to smoke, dust, and fumes, and therefore higher rates of asthma and respiratory illness. Redline neighborhoods often have fewer green spaces to grow crops, and limited access to healthy food options, putting them at risk of experiencing food insecurity. The last 2 points, forced migration and loss of resources and risk of child trafficking, kind of go together. So, because children from low-income neighborhoods experience more adverse effects of extreme weather events, such as tornadoes or hurricanes, which may force migration and loss of resources, the chaos and disruption that follows these natural disasters caused by climate change have led to human trafficking. Children are at an increased risk for trafficking when they lose protection of their social networks and the home. So, with all that being in mind, what do we do with this information? So, I found a planetary health education framework that I think could help build a foundation for moving forward. So this approach comes from indigenous ways of knowing and respecting the land and our bodies. It focuses on education that connects human health with the health of the planet. It emphasizes understanding how environmental issues such as climate change impact both the ecosystem and human well-being. And it empowers students to take action to promote sustainability and global health. So, how might healthcare professionals use this framework to promote health equity? So, on the left, you'll see a diagram here that we're going to go over together to think about how we might answer this question and promote health equity. So, in the middle, we can see this purple star shape is labeled interconnection within nature. So this creates a sense of connection, developing care for the planet, and also a commitment to action. Now, if we move out to the blue semicircle, the Anthropocene and health. So this is understanding how human activities impact the earth and health outcomes. Movement building and systems change. This refers to creating or building effective initiatives that will create a change in our systems. Then if we move down to the bottom, that green circle, systems thinking and complexity. So this involves thinking about our own biases and reflecting on how various systems that we are a part of interact with one another. And finally, equity and social justice. This one is really focused on human rights and requires eliminating systemic disparity so that no one is carrying disproportionate burdens of climate change. And then those outside rings are local learning priorities, global agenda and priorities, socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental conditions, and changes at a planetary scale. So those outer rings are things that are impacting those inner circles and that inner star that we have to think about when we are thinking about how we might move forward with equity or movement building and systems change and our interconnection with nature. It's all sort of intertwined and connected as we think of how we might use this framework to promote health equity. So typically it's used in education fields, but I think it can apply to health as well. So we can't just use a universal framework to treat children because, for example, a child living in a previous red line neighborhood may be experiencing asthma for different reasons than a child living in a high income household. So I think this framework really pushes us to not think in these silos, but to think about how everything is interconnected and how we can address these issues in relation with children using this framework. I wanted to go over some relevant theoretical frameworks that will help ground these ideas into some theoretical implications that might help us move forward with some of this thinking. So the first one is cognitive developmental theory. This theory challenges the notion that development is universal. And we can see that depending on biological, social, and economic determinants, children's development can vary based on their experiences of climate change issues. Climate change arguably impacts children's cognitive development. Attending school in areas that have high air pollution or high temperatures affects children's ability to learn. Additionally, infectious diseases brought on by climate change affects children's ability to attend school and achieve academic success. So we can't see children through a narrow age and stage approach. It has to be broader than that because children's experiences are so vastly different around the world that sort of fitting them into an age and stage boxed approach might not be accounting for all of the lived experiences that they have. Another theory that I thought was relevant to these findings was ecological systems theory. This focuses on the interconnectedness of individuals and their environments. And we can see how children and the environment are really intertwined. Systems around the child, such as where they live and go to school, affects the food they're able to access and their ability to overcome extreme weather conditions. Climate change in general impacts children through direct environmental changes and through the ways that these changes ultimately affect their families, communities, and social structures. For example, heat stress and health risks. So, heat can lead to school closures. Families face higher energy costs to pay for air conditioning. Then communities who rely on agricultural productivity may experience economic hardship due to a lack of growth in their crops. And then this is a burden on the healthcare system to treat health-related illness. So we can see that it's this ongoing, continuous cycle. So in terms of professional practice, there were some recommendations from the Leffers article for healthcare professionals to incorporate into their own practice, and I've included some of them here. So, becoming educated about the climate change impacts on children's health, participate in advocacy in your community to make it more walking, bicycling safe and friendly, advocate for green space and access to fuel efficient public transit, and to prescribe time for children to spend outdoors enjoying nature. As professionals in early childhood fields or working with children and young people in general, what role do you think we have in advocating for and implementing climate change mitigation strategies? And how can we integrate climate change considerations into our practice? Those are just two questions I wanted to leave with you based on the information that we've gone over, how you can integrate some of this into your practice. Maybe it's the framework we went over, maybe it's about including children's voices or asking them questions about climate change instead of avoiding the conversation. Those might be some places to start in terms of thinking about climate change with children and in our own practice. So some key takeaways to leave you with. Climate change disproportionately impacts children's health, particularly children of color and those living in poverty. Advocacy efforts require an equity lens at the national, federal, and local level. And future research calls for multi-pronged intervention strategies that consider the various systems that shape children's lives. This might include environmental, social, political, and economic systems. And I wanted to leave you with this quote to finish the presentation. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. Here are some references in case you wanted to do some further research. And I wanted to thank you very much for listening. I hope that you've learned something from this presentation and that you have a wonderful day. Thank you.